Why couldn't David trust Saul even after he seemed peaceable at times? What did Saul do that made David distrust him? Any thoughts on this? Yes.
Well, I mean, we know the history, right? That Saul had a temperament, and if we remember, David was brought to Saul to calm him down, so they wanted to find out. Okay. So if we remember, David already knew Saul because he had been brought to the court to calm him down, to help him with his spirit, because Saul had a bad temper and he would go up and down and up and down. So this is why David didn't trust him, and he had already, is it this lesson, the review lesson, or the new lesson where he tries to, well, he was always trying to kill him.
All the way through.
Right, he was always trying to kill him. So and he knew that, and that's why he couldn't trust him. And I also think that we all know that because David at that point still had a lot of faith in God, still trusted in God, and I'm sure that God also gave him perception, right, to help him. And we know because throughout the lesson, the review lesson, we also know that even though God put him in trials, and we're going to talk about trials again this lesson, is that he put him there, but he also, it was under his providence so he could learn, so he could develop his character.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. So Saul basically didn't keep his word, did he? So David couldn't trust him even when he made promises. And now we apply it to ourselves. How might I, or we all, be in danger of making mistakes like David in such trials? Because we know that he got a bit scared there at one point. He lost his eye on God. And what did he do? He lied, didn't he? He practiced deception, unfortunately. And how often do we slip in? There might be little lies, so to speak, or just little cover-ups. But nevertheless, God sees them as big ones. And question 4 is, how does the Lord want us to handle matters when our life is in peril? And we can learn from David is to be always truthful and always honest, no matter what the consequence. Because if we have our hearts truly in tune with God, we won't be afraid of the consequences. Our life here on earth really doesn't mean a lot to us, as opposed to the length of it, because we have eternal life with God. So if we remember that, it can help us when we're in situations. And the last question is, under what types of circumstances do I really need to trust God more? So any thoughts on that? Yes.
I think that under all circumstances we need to trust the Lord,
Yes.
especially when we're going through a trial, especially when it's a difficult situation. And,
Yes.
right? Always trust in God. And we see in the past lessons, not just this quarterly, when we talked about Jacob, and even the lesson with Christ and his disciples, that when they weren't trusting and they didn't have that full hold on God and on Christ, is when their lives would go, downwards and not upward. Mm-hmm. And so when do we have to trust in God? We trust in God always. We give him, even for the smallest things.
Yes.
I was reading, just going over the lesson, and sometimes I'm looking for things, and I just read a paragraph, and it applied to me where it said, turn to God anytime you need to make a decision. It didn't say when it's a difficult decision, when you are, you don't know what to do, but turn to God. And I was thinking, because of my sons, that sometimes I make decisions because I think it's the best spiritually.
Yes.
But I'm not turning to God because I think I already know the answer.
Yes.
And so always we should trust in God, have faith in him. Even when we think, because David lied, because he was in danger. Mm-hmm. But we know that he lied, why? Because he lost, just like you said, he lost his eyes on God, his faith in God.
Yes, that's it. And he thought he knew the answers. He thought he was doing making the right choices. So thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Now we will move forward into this week's lesson, which is entitled Brotherly Love. So I'm going to read the verse here from John chapter 15, verse 13. It says here, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." It's one of the most beautiful verses, isn't it? And the paragraph there from Our High Calling, page 184, I shall be reading that. It says, "There are many cords which unite us to our fellow men, to humanity and to God. And this relationship is solemn with its weight of responsibility." So this is going to be our main thread that will be running through the lesson, and we'll see this coming more to light. We'll go over to Sunday's lesson, and the title of that is called Hiding in Dens and Caves. So the first question there and the verses talks about the nobility of David's character, which was what? What did he do that we can see in there that he had nobility of character? Any thoughts? So in the verses it talks about how he cared for his fathers and his family, because obviously Saul was after his life, but they were not sure if his family or his relations would be affected because of it. So he took care of them. He made a decision to put them in a safe place to protect them. And the source of this trait of character, I'm going to read Psalms chapter 57, verse 2 and 3, and we'll find there the source. It says there, "I will cry unto God most high, unto God that performeth all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth." And as the sister mentioned earlier, David, he cried unto God for help. In this instance, he asked for help, what to do, and he got his traits of character from that. Any thoughts on that? Yes, sister.
So this is a beautiful lesson, of course.
It is gorgeous.
I thought this was particularly beautiful because David was going through a lot. He was fleeing from Saul. He knew he was going to be the next king. I mean, you can imagine, I am the king, but I'm still fleeing, and somebody's going to kill me, and then I'm faltering in my faith. Am I going to die? But I thought God had said I was the king. And then we also see that his brothers, at least the oldest one, wasn't happy with David, and they were jealous. So a lot of things are happening. Then he realizes, he understands that he had the priests killed, right, in that city. And so a lot of things are happening, and yet he still looks out for his family,
yes.
Right? And I think this is so important for us because we have lots of families. We have our blood family, we have our church family, we have a lot of families. And I think this is what the lesson is about, this love that we have for our families, this loyalty and looking out for him. And if we know our commandments, the 5th commandment says, honor thy father and thy mother so that thy days will be long on this earth. I think I know it in Spanish, not in English. But so it's such a beautiful lesson that even during all these times, he's still taking care of his family, and he's protecting them, and he's taking them to see where are they best. But also in the note it says that, if I may read it, if you don't mind,
yes.
And it's the 3rd paragraph of the note under 1A. So the 3rd paragraph under the note 1A, in the middle it says, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. He had tasted the bitterness of suspicion and distrust from his brethren." And I took this as, when his brothers were jealous, because they already knew. and the harmony that had taken the place of discord. So now there's a change. It brought joy and comfort to the exile's heart. It was here that David composed the psalm. And I want to just bring this back. How does this apply to us today? Because sometimes we're not in harmony with our family, which is, I think, the first people that we should be in harmony of, because they're our blood. And sometimes we're not. And how do we keep living when we're not in agreement with this? We don't have to agree, but we do have to love, and we do have to be loyal. And if we're not, and it says, I think somewhere in the lesson, that how are we going to be an example to the world if we can't even love our own family? So it's very important for us to have a mindset, and hopefully through the lesson we'll see what the mindset is. But at the end of it all, just like you said, it said that he leaned more heavily. The last sentence of the note under 1a, he says he leaned more heavily upon God.
Yes.
And again, we have the same lesson. We lean on God. We grasp. We take God. Anything we can. God has to be with us.
Thank you very much. And that's true, because we can see, as we saw in the previous week's lesson, the results of not leaning on God, and they're never good. They're never positive. So we should always lean on God through everything. And His harmony and unity is part of what we are to strive for as a church, and as belonging to the body of Christ. We're to come together in unity and peace. And that way, people can't refute that, who are looking on from the world. And I just thought there, in the first paragraph under 1a, where it talks about that his anxiety was not all for himself, although he realised his peril. And it just reminded me of Christ. Even when he was here on this earth and he was being led to the cross, and even when he was being nailed on the cross, his thoughts were never for himself. They were always for others. And I just think it's a beautiful trait of character to have, and it's unable to be had without having Christ in you. So with that, we'll head over to Monday, and the next topic there is called Teaming Up in Trial. And who else there went with David to the cave? So obviously his family was protected, and those close to him, and obviously more people went to be with him too. So who were these people? So these were other people who were in the kingdom who had lost confidence in Saul as the king, obviously through his actions. And he had found out, David's situation, what he was doing, and they wanted to be with him. And this affected David to the point where he almost established a mini kingdom, almost a sort of a practice run, almost, you could say, ready for when he took on the real, the physical kingdom. And in the note there, the second paragraph under 2a, it says there, God was giving David a course of discipline to fit him to become a wise general as well as a just and merciful king. So he was giving him an all-round. It's very similar to Joseph. When he brought Joseph to Egypt, he didn't just promote him straight away to be ruler. He had to suffer hardship first before he could be ruler. And same here as David. Instead of just letting David become king, and Saul just dying, he had to go through trials first to have a more perfect experience, to be more wise when he did become king. It's an amazing philosophy there, but God's ways are always the best. I'll read there the last paragraph from Education, page 152, under point 2a. It says, the uncertainty and unrest of the wilderness life, its unceasing peril, its necessity for frequent flight, the character of the men who gathered to David there, all rendered the more essential a stern self-discipline. These experiences aroused and developed power to deal with men, sympathy for the oppressed, and hatred of injustice. So, who of us could do something like this, you know? Imagine having that amount of self-discipline to be able to control all this, to deal with the situations, you know, the problems that come up, not just, you know, sometimes I think of the overwhelming responsibility of just having one small child and a husband to look after, let alone, you know, these were hundreds of men, like adults, much bigger problems and more difficult. It's incredible. So, any thoughts on this before I go further? Or, yes, sure.
Just really quickly, and I think you mentioned in that, because you read the paragraphs under 2A, and it was for his discipline, it was for his character building, it was for everything. And that's a very good comparison, just like Joseph and Moses and
yes.
all of these people we hear, right? And it was also, I think, that we already know that Saul was an exacting king. He was unmerciful. He did crazy, crazy things that not even worldly people do. He was like down there. It was such a bad example. Nations knew of God. Nations knew of this particular nation that God was protecting. And Saul was just a terrible, terrible king, killing people, throwing javelins and everything. So I think David was a nice difference for all these men, because he was merciful, because this is what he was learning along the way, that God prepared him for, to the sympathy and everything. So I think that was also, this is why they gathered to him, as opposed to, they preferred mercy over a crazy, murderous king.
Yes, exactly. And if you notice, Saul didn't have this experience. He didn't go through trials, like David did. The people just thought he looked the part, but he wasn't. And sadly, he wasn't the part. And in question B there, it goes into the experience that faithful followers of Christ, which we hope and we pray will be us, will have undergone or will have to undergo by the time Jesus comes. So again, we don't just live a peaceful life here and transfer to heaven. It's necessary to go through these times, unfortunately, because we have, we're full of sin, and to get them out. I mean, when you have a dirty pot, you don't rinse it and it comes clean. You have to scrub hard to get it off, and it was saying we're stained with sin, and God has to scrub hard to get us clean, ready for heaven. I'll read there the note, both paragraphs under point B, taken from Christ Object Lessons, page 179 and 180. It says there, from garrets, from hovels, from dungeons, from scaffolds, from mountains and deserts, from the caves of the earth and the caverns of the sea, Christ will gather his children to himself. On earth they have been destitute, afflicted and tormented. Millions have gone down to the grave loaded with infamy because they refused to yield to the deceptive claims of Satan. By human tribunals, the children of God have been adjudged the vilest criminals. But the day is near when God is judge himself. Then the decisions of earth shall be reversed. The rebuke of his people shall he take away. Whatever crosses they have been called to bear, whatever losses they have sustained, whatever persecution they have suffered, even to the loss of their temporal life, the children of God are amply recompensed. Beautiful verses there, and quotes to hold to our hearts when we're going through these times. Yes, and I've never read all the details of what people have been through the Dark Ages there, and what some people might even in some countries go through today, but they're absolutely horrific. And people who can only carry out these afflictions if they're possessed fully by the devil. But those who believe in God can take these references to heart and know that one day, says here, God will be judge himself and the decisions of the earth will be reversed. So oh, may that day come quickly. So with that, we'll head over to Tuesday. And it talks here, it brings in a person here who had good qualities and ones that we can learn from, even though his father was complete opposite. For some reason, Jonathan turned out to be almost the same as David. Beautiful man, beautiful. So he was the son of Saul, and obviously he was in line for the throne. And what are some of the qualities he had already shown here? Does anyone have some thoughts? Yes, sister?
Well, we know he was brave,
Yes.
right? He had, you said it correctly, how he came out of Saul, completely different, an upright man, and fearing of God, and trusting in God as well.
Yes.
And that's the beautiful thing here. And he was loyal, and he wanted justice.
Yes.
Because he didn't think that what his dad was doing to David was, and we see throughout the stories, he would say, well, what did he do to you? Like, why do you want to do this to him? So he was a prince. So he grew up in this court. He knows his dad is crazy. And so you kind of think sometimes you're entitled, right? Like, oh, this is my dad, I can do it too. But he wasn't. He was the exact opposite. So those were some of the qualities that Jonathan portrayed.
Yes.
And then we'll see, how it helps David as well.
Yes, it goes further into it. Because in this particular instance, it talks about how he went and attacked the Philistines all on his own there with just his armour bearer. I mean, a phenomenal act of courage and bravery. I've never seen the like of it. Just amazing. And the incredible thing was, in the next point here, it brings out, and this shows the character of his father. He was ready to put him to death after such an amazing act of bravery and saving their country from the Philistines. The father was literally going to sacrifice him because he disobeyed in a tiny order which he didn't even know about, which I think is just, it's unexplainable on Saul's part, how on earth he could. But it just shows when you're under Satan's influence, the length that you can go to, the depths. But Jonathan, from the character that he had something on his side, wasn't it? And he had the backing of all of the whole nation, because they literally refused the king to put him down. So he must have been well loved. He must have been loved as opposed to Saul. So, and yeah, I'll just read that note there, because I think I still just can't get over how Saul could think to persecute his son who had done such an act. So I'll read the note under point B there on Tuesday. It says, Saul could not claim the honour of the victory, but he hoped to be honoured for his zeal in maintaining the sacredness of his oath. This is how much he wanted glory. He wanted to be number one, unfortunately. Even at the sacrifice of his son, he would impress upon his subjects the fact that the royal authority must be maintained, though the command was unreasonable and had been violated through ignorance. The king and father sentenced his son to death. Just unbelievable. But the people refused to allow the sentence to be executed. And the proud monarch, for all that, he couldn't go against, what the people wanted. And Jonathan's life was preserved for a bit longer. So just goes to show the opposite character there. The people were all for Jonathan, because he showed worthiness and courage and faith in God, as opposed to the king. They literally went against the king, And for all that Saul was evil, he was weak as well, obviously, to listen. So, sister, you had something to share?
And I know we're going to talk about it and his unselfish loyalty, but I want to point out two things. Number one, we had already mentioned it. He is the heir to the throne. It is not David. And even then, he doesn't, he doesn't feel entitled like it's his own. He's not going to go against God's wishes, I think is what he's thinking. And number two, he is a courageous prince, not only in battle, but he's a courageous prince to stand up for what he knows is correct with God, because he stands up to his father. Some characteristics that we're going to see as we go along.
Yes.
So he is just really a phenomenal person,
He is, yeah.
right? And this is what we can be if we're under the guidance of God.
Yes, absolutely.
So many beautiful characteristics, if we're with God, if we trust in God. And we see, because David had these qualities as well when he was looking at God, when he was trusting in God,
yes.
when he was with God. And then we see the difference, Saul, and just like you said, went under the influence of Satan. And these are the two types of people. And we are polishing our character for heaven. This is why we go through trials and we go through persecutions, right? But this also helps us live on earth, because we do live here, right? And we do have to be an example. But it also helps us to be on earth, to be the merciful, standing up for what's right, the different person, at work, at school, anywhere, in the home.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So that it could be a pleasant life here while we're going through these trials. But a peaceful, maybe not pleasant, a peaceful.
Yes.
Because it's so important to be at peace.
Yes. And you can be at peace even going through the most tumultuous, events in your life. You can have that peace through God. Thank you for that, sister. We'll go over to Wednesday now. And as was mentioned, we'll go more in depth here on the unselfish loyalty of Jonathan. And again, his character is phenomenal, as was mentioned, because he was the heir to the throne, and yet he obviously knew about God's purpose for David. So imagine that. I mean, basically David is his rival, really, more so than Saul. But they have this unique bond, which is, and to me this is it's an illustration of the aim for us as church members to be like this. We should all have this, and at home with our family, and then we should want this with people, to be able to come together to show them God, And the depth of the admiration here, I'll read the verse here from 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1 through to 4. It says here that after Jonathan had made an end speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Sort of goes back a bit in time here. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. So this was right in the beginning when I think David first came to live at the palace. Jonathan and David, they had something special there together. And I think when it talks about there that he stripped himself of the robe, I don't think it was just his ordinary clothes. It would have been something significant, like a royal garment that's, it would have been a very serious gesture here. So this was the friendship and admiration that Jonathan had for David. Obviously he would have known about David killing Goliath, so he would have had admiration for him for that. And again, the purpose for this friendship, obviously, as it says, the last sentence of the note there under 4a, that this was the Lord's doing, that Jonathan might be the means of preserving the life of David when Saul would try to kill him. So he was used, it was like a double thing there. Yes, so we go on here in points B and C there, later on there. How had Jonathan interceded in David's behalf? There was a few instances there, wasn't there? I think this one was the one, where David was suspicious of Saul, but Jonathan sort of wasn't quite fully convinced that Saul was definitely out to kill David, So they put together this plan that David would leave and not attend a certain feast, and see what the king said about that. And eventually, when the king realised, he tried to kill his own son for sticking up for David again. So again, you see the crazy character traits, of Saul, as opposed to the steadiness of Jonathan and David. I'll read the verse that's there in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 41 and 42. I like this here where Jonathan has realised now that Saul does mean what he says, and he realises he has to say goodbye to David. And the little boy that they used to show which way Saul had, was deciding, when he had gone, David arose out of a place toward the south and fell on his face to the ground and bowed himself 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept one with another until David exceeded. And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever." And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So it's a beautiful emotional time there, sort of, interesting between, 2 friends, so much so. Imagine crying, when you're going to leave someone. I know it's hard. When I came here, you're leaving your mum and your family and have a few tears. But, we have the hope that one day, we can see each other again sooner rather than later. But here, they didn't know if they ever would see each other again. And I'll read the note there under 4C, where I like it here. It says that Jonathan, by birth heir to the throne, yet knowing himself set aside by the divine decree. And this is the thing, imagine knowing that God had bypassed you, even though he was a good man, to someone else, to his rival, the most tender and faithful of friends, shielding David's life at the peril of his own. The name of Jonathan, I love this, is treasured in heaven, and it stands on earth a witness to the existence and the power of unselfish love. Yes, do you have something to share with that? It's all written there, it's just beautiful, and I like that. It's treasured in heaven. And beautiful when David was in the wilderness of Ziph, and he was obviously very lonely, I guess I'd say, probably a bit down. What did Jonathan do? He visited him in secret, secretly sneaked out and went to encourage him. And after that, it encouraged David's heart in the Lord, and he wrote this Psalms. Psalm chapter 11, verse 1 to 5. We'll read that psalm. Psalms 11, 1 to 5. It says, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David, In the Lord put I my trust. How say ye to my soul, Flee as a bird to your mountain? For lo, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privily shoot at the upright in heart. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth." And I'll just read verse 7, where it says, "For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness, his countenance doth behold the upright." Just to, it was a beautiful thing that Jonathan did. I mean, he risked his life again there to go out there, to see David, to bring him comfort, hope that, if God made a promise, he has to fulfill it somehow, even though it would have been scary, because it was quite a number of years that David was running from Saul. It wasn't just 6 months or even 1 year, it was at least, 5, 6, maybe even 10. Because he was only young when he killed Goliath. And then he became king, I think, around 30 years old or something. So it was a long time. So you imagine the pressure. Eventually, over time, you sort of wear down and get discouraged. And it says there was so few bright spots in the path of David. So this was one little glimmer of hope and encouragement. So we'll move over to Thursday then. And Yes, go ahead.
Just really quickly, and I don't even think it has anything to do with the questions, but I do think, from what I recall reading, that, when they make a pact there,
Yes.
they made a covenant before the Lord, and I think that even after Jonathan's death, I think I recall where David makes sure that he keeps that oath, where he doesn't touch Jonathan's house,
Yes.
because of the loyalty that they had toward each other. And I think that's also a beautiful lesson. Keeping your word, regardless of whatever. I'm not going to touch it because that's how, this is a pact that we made. A lot of beautiful lessons in this friendship that, maybe in this lesson is not for, to all these lessons, there's so many lessons, but so many beautiful things. And they were in blood. They were probably even against blood because there were so many things going on. But they had such beautiful love that if we could apply that to even just our family, or that our life would be so much more different.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, it's an incredible illustration there of the power, and again, that type of attitude that David had towards people, the human way of thinking of that type of attitude is almost weak, is soft, But it's actually the opposite. You can only be like that if you're strong. Strong character people cannot, people who are not strong in character, they can't act like that, But for David to be king, to have gone through all he did, and to keep his promise to someone who could potentially be a threat to him, again, it's the power of God's love. It's, beyond comprehension. And now it comes to us today. What do we as families need to realise about true biblical friendship and the effects of real Christian love? Sister, would you like to read those verses from John there, chapter 13 and 15? Absolutely, you can. John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35, and chapter 15, verse 13. Thank you.
A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another.
And chapter 15, verse 13.
Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends.
Which was the key text as well of this lesson. Thank you very much for that. Beautiful verses, aren't they? It's very difficult for us as humans to even comprehend this love, because so often our love is based on conditions, and only if we receive love in return, or we love people who already like us back, But to have this unconditional love, regardless of the consequences, whether people hate you, whether you have to lay down your life for someone. Imagine loving someone so much you can just do that without blinking an eye. Just, like I said, we have to be filled with God's love to be able to do this. So I'll go ahead and read the note there under 5A from Testimonies, Volume 3, page 530. It says here, our love is frequently selfish, for we confine it to prescribed limits. And that's it. We love someone for as long as they do something for us. Or exactly. We just can't help it. It says, when we come into close union and fellowship with Christ, our love and sympathy and our works of benevolence will reach down deeper and will widen and strengthen with exercise. The love and interest of Christ followers must be as broad as to the world. Those who live merely for me and mine will fail of heaven. God calls upon you, as a family, to cultivate love, to become less sensitive in regard to yourselves, and more sensitive to the griefs and trials of others. So that's very, very strong words there, yes, sister.
So I just want to talk a little bit more about the key text. I think it's in...
Yes, John 15,
right?
13.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. It says that greater love hath no man than this, and a man lay down his life for his friends. And I was as I was studying last week's lesson, I went to, and I found a very nice thought in the Spirit of Prophecy, MB. I don't know what MB stands for, unfortunately. I don't. But it's in the Spirit of Prophecy, initials are MB, page 56, and I want to read a couple of sentences just of why we should lay down our life for others, why we should love unconditionally, because we just talked about it. We have conditions in our love. We limit ourselves. The note says we limit our love. And it's about me, and it's about mine, and then I'll love you, because you love me, and all of this. And it says here, it says, in the gift of his Son for our redemption, God has shown how high a value he places upon every human soul, and he gives to no man liberty to speak contemptuously of another. So what value does he place on a human soul? The value that he gave up his Son for us. That's the value that he places on every single one of us. And I know that when we look at people, I don't like that person, I don't like, we're not thinking about God gave his life for him and for her. Sometimes we think, God gave his life for me, and I think sometimes I forget too, right? It says we shall see faults and weaknesses in those about us, but God claims every soul as his property, his by creation, and doubly his as purchased by the precious blood of Christ. All were created in his image, and even the most degraded are to be treated with respect and tenderness. God will hold us accountable. And it's so interesting because this is not the way we think. We limit ourselves. We don't think this is God's creation. We think, I don't like this, I don't like that. And sometimes even if they love us, we don't love them anyway. And I thought, I have to think when I dislike something or somebody, this is God's creation. He purchased that person like he purchased me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for those thoughts. I believe MB is Mount of Blessing, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Yes, no, it's beautiful, and it's very easy to just slip into that habit, and you judge people on the way they dress, or the way they act, and they're not very Christian-like, etc. And again, we have to remind ourselves of what God puts, what his value he puts on these people, and to look at people with his love. And as we look there in point B, what are some of the important fruits of genuine love? 1 Corinthians, we'll read those from chapter 13, verse 4 and 5. Would you like to read them for us? Thank you very much. So we'll read 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 and verse 5.
Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself. It is not puffed up. Doth not behave itself unseemly. Seeketh not her own. Is not easily provoked. Thinketh no evil.
So that's beautiful, isn't it? So straight off, the first characteristic is long-suffering. Patience. And how sometimes I think, how full is my cup of patience? You have it this much, and then something triggers you off and you think, I need more. And it's kind, it's not envious, it's not proud, it's not selfish, it's not, it behaves itself, wisely at all times. It's always thinking of others, doesn't get angry, and doesn't think any evil. It's basically a description of God, isn't it? Which that is God's character, is love. That's how you describe it, and I think this note here to finish up with is just beautiful. Did you want to say something? No, that's fine. I'll finish up here because to me it just puts it all together in beautiful here from Desire of Ages, page 678. It says, all who are imbued with Christ's Spirit will love as he loved. The very principle that actuated Christ will actuate them in all their dealing one with another. When men are bound together, not by force or self-interest, but by love, they show the working of an influence that is above every human influence. Where this oneness exists, it is evidence that the image of God is being restored in humanity, that a new principle of life has been implanted. It shows that there is power in the divine nature to withstand the supernatural agencies of evil, and that the grace of God subdues the selfishness inherent in the natural heart. This love, manifested in the church, will surely stir the wrath of Satan. So, selfishness and being filled with Satan, is supernatural. It's supernatural agencies of evil, but God is more powerful, and his agencies are more strong than Satan's. And it's all there, we just have to ask for it, And only with that can we withstand Satan and have this love and this oneness that will bring us together ready for Jesus to come. Thank you very much. With that, we will close with thank you all for listening and for being with us, and we'll see you again next week. And yeah. So you finished now? Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll close with hymn number 236. Hymn number 236. I'll turn this off. We're doing the hymn now. Thank you. We'll close in prayer, and I'll ask Brother George to